This episode is sponsored by Active 911, a respected leader in the emergency communication and software field, providing alerting, mapping, and scene resources for over 500,000 first responders worldwide. Now, as you know, I only bring sponsors on this show who are A, coming from an altruistic place, and B, truly bringing solutions to problems. And the origin story of Active 911 begins with volunteer firefighter and tech entrepreneur Joseph Sullivan. After missing a critical call from a dispatch error, Joseph set out to create a solution to ensure that we are not only dispatched on time, but also provide us with resources and information for the call and location. So there are 3 different products under the Active 911 umbrella. The first is Active Alert, a dispatch system integrated into a CAD connection, providing fast, reliable alerting, maps, data, pre-plans, hydrant locations, and even the locations of incoming units and their specialties. The second arm is Active Comms. Now, many of us have experienced problems when it came to communication using our traditional radios, so Active 911 found a way of tapping into the incredible capabilities of modern-day smartphones and integrate that into our communication, providing both increased range and low latency. So to learn more about Active 911 or to try their free trial, go to active911.com. And if you want to hear more about the origin and spectrum of products that they offer, listen to episode 1243 of the Behind the Shield podcast with the creator and founder, Joseph Sullivan. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name's James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show veteran firefighter and the author of The Last Patient, James Owen. Now, in this conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from his journey into Harbor Patrol, his transition into Long Beach Fire Department, his powerful mental health story, the murder of Captain Dave Rosa, catharsis through writing, Camp Pivot, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,200 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you James Owen. Enjoy. Well, James, I want to start by saying thank you so much for getting up so early in California and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast this morning.
I'll tell you what, it is my pleasure. As you know, we're first responders, so we're supposed to be able to work all hours. But in retirement, yeah, maybe the morning is a little tougher.
Absolutely. Well, I know we're going to get to that because I transitioned out as well, and sleep is something that I talk about all the time. Very first question then, where on planet Earth are we finding you today?
Okay, well, we're finding me in my home in lovely Orange County, California, and I'm gifted to live in Newport Beach. So we're having a beautiful June gloom morning here in Southern California.
Have you ever heard of a barbershop called Kempt?
I have not heard of Kempt.
I'm going to give him a shout out because that's my old truck partner, one of my best friends. He and his wife have, I think there's a couple, one in Irvine and one in Newport Beach. But yeah, if you ever want a great haircut, look up Kempt, Kempt in Newport.
I'll have to give him a look. Locally, I go to the Pig Barber, and so there's some competition for first responders apparently in the area. We'll have to try them both out.
All right. Well, I want to start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Okay. Well, I I was fortunate enough to be born abroad. I was born in London to a teenage mom who was running away from her alcoholic parents and situation that she had and decided to start a life as a young lady with a British man. And that was a very hot and passionate relationship that resulted in me. I was the result of that relationship, and the two of them, the two of them couldn't get along, and they each internationally kidnapped me back across each border to where I ended up here in the United States because my mom's father, my grandfather, was a TWA pilot, so somehow I was able to skirt the line, I guess, in early 1970s, and made it back here to the United States, where I started my life with a single teen mom in Southern
My
California.
my wife also had a hot and passionate relationship with an Englishman. What a coincidence.
Must be something with those Englishmen.
Well, joking apart though, going back to it. So one of the things that I talk about a lot, I wrote about in my most recent book, is the impact of generational trauma. So before we even
Mhm.
take a dive into, the international element of your upbringing and the kidnapping, what was the dynamic in your mother's home? Talk to me about the grandparents and the upbringing that she had.
Well, of course, all that I hear is anecdotal and from her and other family members. But to a general sense, that she grew up in an alcoholic home where the alcoholism and the family dysfunction wasn't addressed. It was just swept under the rug. So there was no processing going on in the home that she lived on. And again, I mentioned that my grandfather was a airline pilot. So much like the fire, like a fire family, the one of the people, the problems goes away for a period of time, so it could perpetuate a bad relationship for a long time. I wasn't there. I didn't see all that happened to her, but it did result in her feeling compelled to, leave home early as a teenager and then start life as a young woman with a marriage and a baby. And, from that, uh, I don't think that we ever really opened that box up too much as a family. It was just kind of like that was knowledge of what happened, and we moved on from it.
It's interesting though because the dominoes are falling, and I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine, and Generation X, like our generation, are in a very very unique position because we grew up in the "shut up, don't talk about it, rub some dirt in it, don't be a pussy," all these the rhetoric of and what we were taught, and then further beyond backwards. And then our children are being introduced to mental health and emotional awareness and all these things. And so we're straddling both sides. And on one hand, we're able to even send that information back to our parents' generation, and then also stop the pendulum swinging too far in that direction for the young people. So, all that stuff is incredibly important. But now, if you're offended by everything anyone says, you've gone too far on the other side, and you're actually shutting down healthy conversation. So it's a really, I think we got a position of responsibility in this age group that we're at, because we really are kind of the gatekeepers between both sides of this mental health journey that we've witnessed.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And let me double click on what you're saying right there. So, yeah, we grew up, I guess, with the running microwaves. Okay, and those that can even believe this, we had to talk on the phone in the kitchen because it was attached to a wire, and that's so things are just like completely different. But one of the things that you said that I want to double click on there is in ACA, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families. There's a very specific rule that dysfunctional families have, and that's the don't ask, don't tell, don't feel rule. And that's a generational give, right? So we give that generationally, this dysfunction down. And when you talk about us Gen Xers, well, we have seen the most change in society of any generation as far as going from technology wise, and probably societal's changes. So it is for us to straddle that line and be able to bring in something from ACA, this feel good organization, a 12 step, and then transmute this all the way over to the fire service. And I think that that's where our dynamic, or any service that the Gen Xer would be a part of. I think that we were the last ones to be taught by the greatest generation as well. So we have a lot of those type of qualities that we take forward.
Well, also our parents, I mean, I don't know the exact age of yours, but mine were children during World War II. So they were literally being moved to different towns because the Germans were bombing and killing their neighbors. So they actually felt that. Whether they were old enough to be aware of it is different, but that feeling of not being safe, we have an entire generation of my parents' generation that still have that in their DNA. And so we felt that. When I was born, it was only 30 years after World War II ended. So that is so close to us still. But now, again, this young generation, even though we have 20 years of war in the Middle East, that cautionary tale that was up close and personal, because everything that happened the last 20 years was not domestic. Apart from 9/11, everything was overseas. We didn't see it. We didn't feel it. But World War II, we saw it and we felt it in Europe, at least. So even that, the reminding people of what happens when you allow the few to oppress the masses, and put people in the boxes and call them the enemy, and all the very exact same patterns that we saw in the 1930s in Germany, rearing its ugly head again. So even that, like, we have a responsibility to tell our parents and our grandparents' stories, so our children and grandchildren hopefully will learn from history.
I couldn't agree more. We were witness to those that witnessed war, and then there was a gap in that until we had what Iraq won, and then we started having firsthand reports coming back, to us about the cost of war, and we have that period of peace in time, and I've heard others say, periods of peace produce soft men, and perhaps we soften our society by not remembering the lessons of war. Like we hear, and then it looks like we just continue to. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes with it, and it just seems like we make the same mistake over and over and over again. Like you say, the fact that we other people. I was taking I was doing the Seattle Fire Department captain's test, and I had never heard that term before. I was working with a civil service lady, and she said, "Oh yeah, they're othering that person." I go, "What does that mean?" And goes, "Oh, they're separating them into a different group than they're in, so that they can examine them differently." And you know, uh, my book, The Last Patient, is not even a firefighter book either. It's a human book, right? And then this is a human story about how to get through tough times, and how to st- uh, being witness to those that were true sayers about war really keeps us honest into policy and like where the direction of society should go.
That phrase where they, and I'll completely butcher it, but where tough times make tough men, and it goes around, and soft times make soft men. It's interesting because it's the tough men that are out there in uniform, and women, fighting these battles, holding the line on the streets as first responders. But it's not tough men that are making decisions in these political environments. So I think we've got that whole kind of rhetoric skewed. The tough men are always out there, whether they're mechanics or teachers or whatever. They're the ones actually out there doing the work. The soft men have always been the ones hiding behind, whether it's frivolous lawsuits as a lawyer or as a politician. And that's the problem, is there's a disconnect between the tough men and women that are out there actually seeing and doing, and the people we allow to pull the puppet strings.
We're we're similarly positioned in that as well. And what hurts is when we see, through my experience as a firefighter, when we promote somebody that doesn't necessarily have the human capital in mind to start with, and that becomes evident right away. And when essentially selfish decision making, and that's known by the troops. But when somebody has rank, I mean, what are we? You're not going to go tell them. There's not a whole lot of upward communication in a paramilitary organization, right? So, um, But it's conversations like this, and it's men like me and you that are taking the step forward to be out there in front of the public eye to highlight some of these things and to try to pass these time tested traditional societal masculine uh, traits forward, so we can avoid more war, we can avoid more consternation, and we can have first responders that are more effective, right, and do a better job for us too. It's interesting. We only have to adjust the dials just a little bit, and we're going to get a lot more performance out of the machine.
Absolutely. And with performance comes health. And that's the thing now. I've reframed even the whole health and mental health conversation. If you drive for performance and you look, for example, at your favorite sports team and what they do, and the World Cup's going on now. So, you look how they train, how they space the games out, how they eat, the sports psychologists they have, all that forges elite performance. Well, that also pulls people away from obesity, from, addiction, from mental health crises. So performance is exactly the word we need to be talking about. But when you look at how firefighters and cops and EMS personnel are worked, performance isn't even close to what they're talking about.
Right. And in a profession such as the first responder profession, where you were below the line of rested for so long, that starts skewing your decision making. So if every shift you're going down and you're not coming back up to 100% charge, you're only coming back to 75%. Well, after a while, 75% starts becoming your baseline, and you're never going to get back to 100%. I'm roughly coming up on 4 years of retirement now, and my sleep patterns are still not connected like they should be. That is an area that I would like to make the most progress on, and that I make the slowest progress on is on my sleep effectiveness.
Well, we'll definitely dive into that in a little bit because, like I said, that's a topic I want to talk about. But let's go back to the timeline for a moment, because you mentioned international kidnapping. I'm sure a lot of people listening were like, wait a second, can we go back to that? What was that?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
you
Let's
have,
let's talk about that.
you have transatlantic parents. So yeah, tell me about that dynamic.
Trans
What was the issue with the relationship, and then how did that involve you being ferried around across the Atlantic?
Right. So the international kidnapping back and forth on planes and passports all happened in a very short period of time. So by the time I was 3 years old, my mom was out of Europe, living in Southern California, free of that man and not talking to him anymore. And she was looking for a new man, a new direction to take. So she met my hero, my stepdad, and she married my dad, Doug Owen, when I was 5 years old. And Doug Owen was a 6 foot tall, very handsome man, very well spoken, a boater, a dreamer, and a lover. And they were 16 years apart in age, and she just fell head and heels in love with him. He came with a little bit of baggage. He's quite the dreamer and carouser. So he had a lot of ladies and he had a lot of kids. And those, and so my childhood was spent with a lot of a Brady Bunch collection of kids that would kind of come and go through our house. Those two decided that we were going to move up to Northern California. So my family and his family's from here, but he wanted to live in Northern California. So we moved up to Sonoma County, and that's where I grew up, was up in Sonoma County in Petaluma and Healdsburg. Now my stepdad Doug was a huge boater, as I mentioned, and so he always had boats around. So when we were in Southern California, he had a power boat, but up in Northern California, he started his sailing career. And so I started my sailing career right with him at age 5 out there on San Francisco Bay. One of the windiest, gnarliest places to go sailing in the world. If you can sail in San Francisco Bay, you can sail anywhere in the world. And so we went out there and sailed around as a kid, and he just loved it. That was our family pastime.
What about the kind of law enforcement side of the kidnapping, though? Where were you taken illegally, and how were you retrieved? Because that, again, we're talking about early childhood trauma, the hierarchy of needs, the safety, the security. That must have even been traumatic, even if you weren't young enough to really be aware of it.
To be honest with you, James, this the maybe the story has the hearing the story as a child that maybe I was somewhat different from others hearing how this happened. But my English father just got fed up with the situation, and I was on his passport because I couldn't derive citizenship for my mom. So to leave the country, I was on his passport. Now he didn't have a letter for my mom, which was the law to allow the a baby to go to London. And so once he was in London with me, he would call back to the United States and talk to her on the phone and let me cry over the phone. And so she presented this problem to my grandfather and said, "Hey, we're going to fly over there to London and we're going to go get your baby." So they flew across the drink. The details of how all that went down is what all I understand is they came and got me and went in through the crew line back through the airline, and there was no question of why they had a baby. And on the plane I went, and back I came to the United States without his permission. So when I say I was internationally kidnapped, I mean that's it's true on both sides. One parent didn't want me to go one way, and one parent didn't want me to go the other. And my biological father struggled with alcoholism all the way back to, I guess way back when she first met him. And I guess he just the last I heard is that he struggled with his addiction his entire life and ended up a street indigent in London and died because of injuries being a street indigent in London. It's a sad story.
Extremely sad. I think this is important. Again, we're talking about the generational trauma, and what was his background, and how did he find himself there? And this is what I'm seeing over and over and over again. Is there's when there's struggles in our generation's household, it's because there were struggles in their household and struggles in their house, and you can literally trace it back and back to the responsibility of our generation. Now we're finally having these conversations and finally understanding it. That's how we stop the dominoes from falling on our kids and our grandkids. But it takes a lot of courage. It really does, to examine our upbringing and also, forgive our parents for the upbringing that they had that contributed to their behavior.
Right. So forget. So let's talk about our parents give us this trauma, and as kids, I think you're going to agree with me. As that trauma was coming in the door, I could see it as a kid. I could see it. I was like, "This is not right. Other families aren't doing this. This is ridiculous." And forgiveness was a really hard word to get to. Okay. I had to find a word, I had to find something to get to before forgiveness. I had to get to compassion. And man, that is a hard one to do. Now, what compassion looks like is when you stop with yourself and you get into the other person's psyche and start looking life out through their eyes to see what maybe that they're seeing. And you look at how they're interpreting the information, and that's where the compassion can come in. You can go, "Oh my gosh, okay, we have a broke operating system here. We learned something different." So for me, when I started to have compassion, it was for my one of the significant relationships that I had to work on was my relationship with my stepdad is my dad. So when you hear me say my dad, that's my stepdad Doug, because he's my dad.
Yeah.
I grew up with him, and we even look alike. Uh, but I couldn't get to forgiveness. I couldn't. But once I got to compassion and begin to understand and look into what his childhood was all about, the physical abuse that he sustained. His father died when he was 10. My mom came from an alcoholic family, and it was inevitable. Okay, it was inevitable that they would screw it up. So when we talk about people that have to hold the line, yes, uh, maybe there's something super wonderful about Gen Xers. I don't know, but our generation is tasked with the awareness of what truth is and to try to drive that truth, because we grew up with we all grew up with kind of a similar truth. We all watched the same news podcasts. We all listen to the same music. So we all have kind of a shared identity, is where you don't see that happening anymore, where everybody can, they get their influence from all over the place, which diversity is great, but it doesn't offer like a group of people that all have the same kind of like operating system to do stuff together. Does that make sense? I know that's kind of broad, but
No, actually it does, and even more so for me because like when I grew up, we only had 3 TV stations. There was a fourth one that came a little bit later, and then right, when I was almost ready to leave, it was a fifth one, but that was it. So I mean, through the television, if you're a British kid, you were only getting so many. Now that's what I think made British TV very good, because you had to put good stuff out there because there were only so many spots, and there was a lot of kindness and compassion. I've talked about this a lot in the programming, in the way we were even being taught. So that was phenomenal. This is why I charge my, men and women of my age. And it's the same here. You have Mr. Rogers and, all these other like Comic Relief and Live Aid, and we were taught to be kind. So
you
if you're
had
not a
Monty
kind
Python.
person and you're Gen X, yeah. So if you're not kind as Gen X, you've strayed, and you need to come back to how you were taught. Bob Ross, I mean, all these people that really were teaching us don't be a dick when we were young.
Yeah,
and now
right.
there's a lot of us that are dicks. So come back to the middle again. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We were all kind of taught to think the same way, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But now it's complete chaos, and you can jump in and kindness and compassion, or you can go into some really dark places, all through the screen in your hand. So that's a very, very interesting point.
The baby boomer generation, okay, from the media that I have seen, has been looked at as a selfish generation, kind of a me generation, the yuppie generation. And we were the witness to all that. We were the witness to, on one end we had the greatest generation, and on the other end we had the yuppies, and I'm going to take off and look at me. So it is an interesting place and time to be a human being. And I think that gives us a unique way to describe life, and how we, because we didn't have all these computers, we had to like remember how we got to things. So we're able to document processes and understand processes. We had to remember all that. I mean, do you remember back in the day? You probably had 100 phone numbers memorized in your mind. You just dial them up right out of your mind. Today, I probably know a handful of them.
Yeah, no, and even things, and I've seen people post memes about this, but reading shampoo bottles and things in the toilet where you're trying to poo, because you're not looking at your phone, so you literally randomly start reading ingredients or whatever it was. So yeah, there was a lot more. I heard someone talking about this recently. Today we're talking about mindfulness. Like, well, when we were young, mindfulness was just a thing because there wasn't all this distraction. There weren't screens everywhere. There weren't computers. So you did just kind of sit and think a lot more. And it's not, again, this kind of looking down on kids today. It's now taking the good things from when we were young and then bringing them to that young generation. I think a lot of them are actually leaning into that. Everything from buying records and books because they want to have a tangible, connection with the music they're listening to, or the art that they're reading or looking at, or learning to communicate better because they've been taught to communicate with emojis and anagrams and LOLs and all this kind of stuff. And I think some of them identify we're kind of losing some skills here. So there is a renaissance happening in this young generation where they want some of the things that we have when we were young. So again, we get to be the ones to pass that over, and I think that's a phenomenon. So it's a responsibility, but it's a beautiful opportunity to take those lessons and pass them on, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. In a tribal setting, as you start getting older, is passing on the wisdom.
I want to say that a different. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I'm going to say this a different way. You younger people need to learn how to be bored. Being bored is great. Gives you an opportunity to go check out what's going on in your mind. Flight delay, no big deal. Go check out what's going on in your mind. You might be able to do some processing up there. But being able to deal with boredom is an art that needs to come back.
Absolutely. Well, going back to your early life, what were you playing and doing as far as sports and exercise?
So I was a four-eyed, thick glasses, dorky kid. Okay. I mean, I was picked last for soccer team every damn recess. And I had stepbrothers and sisters. They kind of came and went, but really it was me, my mom, and my dad. And we would spend the weekends typically out on the sailboat, sailing around uh, different places in the San Francisco Bay. And where I grew up in Northern California, it's just, if anybody's ever been there, Sonoma County is one of the most beautiful places in the entire world. And they were busy partying and having arguments and combatants inside my house. So I spent a lot of my childhood outside. I was either outside or I was inside where there was either a cold house where nobody was there, or when they were there, then I wanted to be outside. So I spent a lot of time out in nature. And that's spending time out in nature, just one on one, that much time as a kid up in Northern California, that introduced me to what I'm going to call higher power, creator. I was able to see uh, from going out into nature in Northern California, I just connected to it in a really soulful way and learned that spending time in nature could make me feel better about the things that were going on in my house that I didn't understand. So that was a cornerstone of what I did. The sailing was one, and then living out in Sonoma County was another. I take another step further. When we decided to move to Healdsburg, we moved on to a home that was situated on 96 acres of Zinfandel grapes. Beautiful vineyard, and my parents rented a home on this little hill that looked out to St. Helena and these beautiful rolling hills, the most picturesque place you could ever believe to live. And as a teenager, it's just we were out in the middle of nowhere. I didn't love it. So we lived 3 miles out of town, and I would ride my bike. School was uphill both ways. By the way, it's really hilly up in Northern California. So I used to ride my bike up and down the hills 3 miles to high school, back and forth, and it was a it was a latchkey, an extreme latchkey kid early lifestyle. That's how I would say it. So I was on my own quite a bit, and it was probably more like at times my parents would be gone for days, and I would just make it through. So I remember when I was 10, I did a 3 dayer by myself. Whatever calamity or situation went on, hey, I made it. They made it. We made it through it, right? But that's not necessarily part and parcel for raising salient kids. Is not necessarily the parenting that would produce results that you would want, but in fact it did teach me a lot about life at an early age. So probably a lot like you, and I think like a lot of first responders, I was thrust into the situation where I had to grow up very early.
Knowing now how many of us have adverse childhood experiences that send us into this profession, which I think is a great
Mhm.
conversation to have if we recognize it and acknowledge it at the front door. You've talked about some of these elements. Were there any other contributing factors that happened to you when you were young that ultimately you brought into the profession?
Certainly. So what we're talking about here is the ACEs, which is the Adverse Childhood Experience Score, and it is a way to rate from 1 to 10 what a child has been exposed to traumatically, just an organic way to a baseline, if you will. When I took the ACEs test, I am a 9 out of 10. A 9 out of 10. I have met people that are 10 out of 10, and the only thing on that list that I have never been is suicidal. Okay, I've considered not being around, but I've never come up with a method for suicide. So what does that mean? You could open that up. I've experienced sexual trauma by women, physical trauma by parents, emotional trauma. We've talked about that, and so all those things were on there. And incidentally, I thought I was super unique with this type of experience going into the first responder world, but it turns out that people go into the world of helping, being a first responder. There's a preponderance of us that have high scores in the ACEs that we bring forward into our careers. And just to take a little bit further, I believe that a portion of why I was wanting to become a first responder is to see how other people dealt with trauma and to perhaps give me clues of how I would deal with my own.
See, this is where I think there's such a beautiful opportunity to have this honest and raw conversation about this very thing. And that would make a huge dent into the mental health crisis. This learning curve, I'm going to just take myself. It was about 10 years ago that this door was open to me. Hey, this is actually a thing in our profession. Hey, there are people that have been talking about it a long time. There are solutions. And then as we've gone in, it's gone from PTSD to, the more nuanced moral injury, PTSD, organizational betrayal, these other things. And then the toolbox has got wider and wider. It's not just talk therapy and psych meds, it's equine therapy and psychedelics and it's in 10 years, if you drew a line of our learning and understanding of this conversation, it would be near vertical. I mean, we've had to go from 0 to 100. And that's an amazing thing because we've learned really fast. And some of these people have been out there a long time talking about it. And we listen finally. Where I feel there's an amazing opportunity is when we stand on the drill ground, towing the diamond, that they say to us, the fact that you are here means that you've been through some shit. And that is a good thing. That is something to be proud of because you took that and you said, I want to stop other people hurting. I want to build an armor around myself and I want to protect other people. So as much as we're going to do PT for your body, we're going to do PT for your mind. And as we progress through the first year, we're going to give you X amount of counseling sessions. You're going to build a relationship with a counselor. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to talk about, but you're just going to talk. You're going to have zero barrier to entry. It's all going to be free. And then that means that down the road, when you start having issues in relationships or bad calls, you know exactly who to go to. And so you can offload when you're not at crisis. You can offload when it's a normal element. And then even more, as we talk about performance, that will keep your mind clear so that you can get close to that flow state when you're trying to do a primary search in a burning building. So I think that now we're understanding this. There's such an amazing opportunity to remove all stigma by saying the way that we make you a better firefighter is we help you work through some of the stuff that happened that brought you here in the first place. And you will be a better firefighter, a better husband, a better father or mother when we take you through this. The push-ups and running will make your body strong. And then the counseling and whatever other tools we use is going to make your mind strong. So I think that we've taken it from the kind of sad, victim-y story that was told about 10 years ago, and now we're making an exciting post-traumatic growth story.
I'm going to take that baton and I'm going to run with it right on top of what you said. Okay, so everybody, I'm going on top of James here. So in addition to that, our retirees are walking out the door with decades of experience, and we're just letting them just drift off to the sun. And our retirees, including me, when you retire, guess what? Your purpose leaves, your mission leaves, and your team leaves, and you go through a very, very dramatic. I'd say it's like dropping into a gigantic wave. You just don't know if you're going to be able to make that bottom turn. Okay, surfing analogy here. So I propose that we we purpose our retirees, make them fire grandfathers and feed them right back to the eggs in the academy and talk about those, because the fire grandfather is going to validate saying, yeah, we actually do need to do mental health drills in the fire academy. We're going to do mental health drills so you know how to deal with you and you know how to deal with those people that have mental health issues, because that is in short supply. They teach us how to run into the fire really well. But what's little conversation has happened, and it's starting to happen more and more, is what happens when the fire follows us home. What happens when the fire follows us into our parenting? What happens when it follows us into our financial state? What happens, and it's this ripple that goes all the way out. The people that have dealt with it for decades, processed it, and gotten to the end of it are going to be our retirees. So we need to capture those people and feed them back into the front of the system.
I love that because you're giving them purpose as well. And this is what's sad. I know you just did an interview with the LA Times and they pulled some stats and it said, I forget what it was now, like 112 suicides. And I was like, no. That's what the people are telling you from the organizations, from people that were still wearing the uniform. But that is the tip of the iceberg for every single man and woman that left the fire service, whether it was a full retirement, whether it was injury, whether it was termination, whatever it was, and they ceased to be a statistic. And so I would say, I'm not exaggerating, it was probably 100 times that of premature deaths because of mental health issues with former first responders, because there's no VA for police, fire, and EMS, so we're not counted. So those stats are woefully they're woefully underreported in uniform. We know how many people, air quotes, died suddenly or died unexpectedly. You know what that means.
Mhm.
But your retirees are the ones where it's the biggest portion that we're losing. So bringing them back in, giving them a sense of being connected still to the fire service, that benefits them as well. And then, this front door conversation, you also have a back door conversation. So you're making sure that your retirees are ready to retire and they don't have that feeling of loss of identity and tribe and purpose, because they've had a healthy transition into something else that also brings them value.
I couldn't agree more. And the operator coming in benefits, the operator going out benefits. They both have mission and purpose. And how long do you have to grandfather somebody in the fire service? The other agencies, and I wouldn't know, but 2 or 3 years, and that would be a perfect amount of time for a retiree to manage the young folks, encourage their adaptive coping techniques, encourage, hey, how's your yoga practice doing? Does it want a divorce? Someone that can just chime in, somebody that knows the personalities and the pitfalls as well. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. Such as like this. Can you believe this? I'll give this to any fire chief listening. How is it that when we have somebody that enters the disciplinary system, that doesn't automatically trigger a one-on-one peer support member? Didn't we go through this gigantic testing process of thousands of people and sort through everybody, and then we had them interview all these times, and we did a background investigation on them, and then we invested a whole academy in them, and then we put a whole year of their probationary year, and then they have a disciplinary issue. Did they turn into bad people all of a sudden that we need to like scold them? Or is that a hallmark indication that maladaptive coping has shown up some sort of way? So that's the low hanging fruit that we just don't see, that we could just do this. I was lucky enough to be in the disciplinary system multiple times, and I can tell you, every time that I was in the disciplinary system, I would have been I might have averted the next one by having some help, having the tribe come up. And again, when you do something wrong and you don't, and you're disciplined, you get othered, right? You get taken away from the tribe as a form of punishment. That's the last place you need somebody that's going through mental health or going through a difficult time to do. It needs to be around the tribe, or at least one of the tribe members.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if you look at addiction, for example, what happens to an addict? An addict is filling a void because they, have guilt, they have shame. And so what do? We stigmatize addiction. And so we add more guilt and shame to guilt and shame. Well, how's that working out? And it's the same with us. I've said this many times. What was that person like when you hired them? If they were a turd at the front door, then you should never have hired them. That was the wrong hire. And this is we'll get to this in a minute, but this is what scares me about, the falling of hiring standards because of this recruitment and retention crisis that the fire service has created, and it's easily solved. But when you have people that, as you said, you went through this vigorous testing process, and 22 years ago when I was testing, you were up against thousands of people for a class of 15. So you were, vetted and vetted and vetted. Now fast forward 15, 20 years, and Steve or Sandra is just got their second DUI. Are they a piece of shit, or are they hurting? Is there something going on? Is the way that to treat this actually to wrap them with resources and support and get them back to who they are supposed to be, which was the very person that you hired in the first place?
Also, it's I'm gonna take the baton and run. I'm gonna take it and run a little bit further. Okay. Right from the beginning, it seems like anytime that I've done anything significant, I've needed a commitment buddy, somebody that's been designated me to be a commitment buddy. So if I were to restart my fire service and I was had the ability to have maybe even somebody in my class was my commitment buddy, and I had a fire grandfather that was able to advise our little group of me and my commitment buddy. Those have been two very close resources for a lot of stress that perhaps I could have taken a lot earlier rather than gone down the pride route. And when you go down the pride route, as an addict, pride shame follows right after because you'll treat it with maladaptive coping techniques. I can't tell you how many times I stood up at an AA meeting saying I was a newcomer and feeling that shame and not realizing, because I was treating it like I was just trying to get rid of the common cold and not realizing that, my addiction was going to kill me.
Let's walk through your journey into the fire service. And I know you had beach patrol, harbor patrol prior to that. So what were you dreaming of becoming? And how did that ultimately lead you into Long Beach Fire?
Thank you. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a journey here with me, everybody.
Please.
So when I was 16, my parents came and sat me down and they say, hey, we need to talk to you. And the hallmark like, uh-oh, there is some BS incoming. And this is all in my book, The Last Patient, where they say, sit down and they say, hey, Jim, we've decided that we're going to sell everything and move on to our sailboat to save our marriage. And Jim, ultimately, we're going to save you. I was like, what are you guys talking about? So my parents sold everything. I tried to live with a relative in Newport Beach, here where my family was, and she had dementia. And if it was after 5 p.m. and it was dark, I wasn't getting to bed that night. She wouldn't give me a key to her house. And so it worked out that I ended up on that sailboat, my little 32-foot, what I thought was going to be a prison, sailed down to Mexico with my parents and spent a season down in Mexico sailing with them. And the reason why I bring that up is because the experience of the ocean, having to respond to all the chaotic nature of what can happen on a boat and being prepared for that started to set me up for the desire to become a first responder. I could see that I could think clearly through chaotic situations, look to see what the mechanical issue may or may not be, and keep my head about me when things were starting to go hairy on a boat. So as once we came back up to the United States, I did another tour down to Mexico with my buddy George Rousseau. We ended up on a urologist boat going to Mexico one more time, and we partied too much and got kicked off that boat. But I started working out at Catalina Island, and I lived out there for the better part of 7 years. And I initially I drove a trash boat out on Catalina Island, and I would drive up and down. It was one of the greatest jobs ever, by the way. There you are, Catalina Island. You got a boat that you got to drive half the island. You go and picking up everybody's trash. 75 cents to pick up the trash. Everybody would give me $1. I was making tips, and I was driving the island as a teenager. But I started to hang out with they have Baywatch paramedics and the lifeguards and the firefighting first responders out there. And I got more and more interested in becoming a first responder. And the more I found out, the more that I saw what they were doing, I was like, you know what? I think this is a great job for me. It's a lot like cruising. The office is always changing. It's always dynamic. So I worked my way up to, by the way, along the way, I got a DUI when I was 18. And when I was working the issues of my DUI off when I was in Avalon, I had ended up meeting the first responders, and I did such a good job of doing community service around Avalon that they saw that I was in earnest trying to get through my DUI, deal with my issues. So I was off to get onto the City of Avalon Harbor Patrol. Now, right when I was about to get on the City of Avalon Harbor Patrol, I was working at Antonio's Pizzeria on the water. So when you're in Catalina, you always have two jobs. So I was Harbor Patrol by day and then waiting tables by night. One day, four vacation drunk, bigger than life Long Beach firemen came in and got plunked down in my section. I was 19 years old, and they looked up at me. They were ordering a bucket of beers. They go, "Hey, kid, what do you want to do for a living?" And I had the balls to say, "I want to become a fireman." And they went, "Oh, do you?" And I got shredded for about the next 30 minutes. I felt like I didn't have a piece of clothing on me by the time they were done with their verbal bombardment. But they saw something in me and they said, "Hey, if you do everything that we tell you to do, you could probably become a firefighter, if not probably a Long Beach firefighter." And then at 19, I looked those men in the eye and I said I would do it. And I did it. So from there, from the Harbor Patrol, I said, "What do I need to do?" They said, "You probably should go become a paramedic. Go to paramedic school, and then you can go over to the mainland and work as a paramedic." So I tested and got into Daniel Freeman Paramedic School in 1993. And I went from Healdsburg, being a high school dropout. So when we left on that sailboat, I just quit high school, to Harbor Patrol. I had done some EMT. I got through all that DUI nonsense. And now all of a sudden I was in paramedic school, and that was the biggest eye opener ever. That's a fire hose of information to digest and to understand at once. So I used my connections with Long Beach to do my paramedic rides with Long Beach, and I made it through there in 20 shifts. And then I ended up getting a job. I went back to the Catalina, but one of the sheriffs out there knew somebody on the mainland who worked at an ambulance company and could probably get me a job as a paramedic. So I got hired with Adams Ambulance in Linwood, California in the 90s. And that ambulance company did the first in 911 for Linwood. So I moved to Long Beach. I started working for Adams Ambulance. I was working part-time for my mom as well, trying to make ends meet. I think I was making like $7.64 an hour as a paramedic there in Linwood. But in the 90s, so those of you who don't know, Linwood touches it doesn't touch Long Beach, it touches Compton. Paramount is close to Long Beach, and it's generally known as kind of a rougher area, and it certainly was in the 90s. So I couldn't believe it. It was one of the busiest places in Southern California. It had quite a bit of like gang warfare, freeways, had two hospitals, so it had a potpourri of everything. And it was I put my feet to the fire, and that's where I started. That's where I started all my testing. Right, so I was living in Long Beach, working at Adams Ambulance, and then I started taking my fire tests.
Talk to me about that violence. I mean, I was a huge hip hop fan back in the 90s, which is funny for a little British, farm boy, but it is true. I loved it. But obviously, it was so disconnected. And then when I finally moved to the States and became a paramedic and worked in urban settings, I was like, oh, this is what they were talking about. And it's not very glamorous. But around the Compton area, around that timeline in the 80s, obviously it's notorious for, the gang activity and the drugs. So what were you seeing? Talk to me about some of the cause, because I mean, that is a dark part of American history that we, allowed Americans, young American boys especially, to end up being dragged into this illicit, drug industry and then start killing each other over colors and corners. And so what were you seeing through a paramedic's eyes?
Right. So, well, I want to double tap on the fact that you said that you listen to hip hop and all that. So I'm going to call you out. I'm pretty sure you were a break dancer, weren't you? Because I'm going to admit it here, everybody. I was a break dancer, retired break dancer. Okay, then we'll get into the
Yeah,
trauma.
I wasn't. I just listened to it and bobbed my head a little bit, but no, I didn't have the acrobatic or gymnastic skills to be a breakdancer. So I can all I could do is move my body to the rhythm. That's about the ceiling for me.
I've done some embarrassing things in my life, but breakdancing on cardboard in downtown Healdsburg to a bunch of rednecks, that might have topped my all time dummy list. So when I got to Linwood, I had not really seen much trauma. I'd done essentially 20 shifts in Long Beach. and I had worked out at Catalina Island where, dive injuries and, it's just there's not the volume of trauma. It was different in Linwood. Uh, so one of the things I used to tell people is there was so much gun violence there that, and we worked with the sheriffs, that I would be able to ask the sheriff, say, what kind of gun was that? And after a while, I could start seeing what type of injuries were related to what type of ballistics. So if you've ever seen somebody that's got shot with a 30-06 or that type of high velocity round versus like a 9 millimeter, that's a way different type of injury. And an AK, the AK round, I remember reminded me, the injuries look a lot like somebody got hit with a machete. Like they just zip open parts of the body like a big cut. So uh, it was tit for tat drug warfare. There was two fire stations in Linwood, and who was going after who didn't seem to be really. It was very random. So there was a lot of there was Hispanic gangs, and then they would have their beefs, and then there were African American gangs, and then they would have their beefs, and then they would have beefs with each other, and it seemed like there was an extraordinary amount of stabbings as well. And I would just ask, look, I don't know if this is true or not. I'll just tell you what I was asking, because I didn't know. I was just a kid, right? I was a young kid, and say, why are all these, I don't understand why are all these people getting stabbed, or like, oh well, that's people that get stabbed, that's they teach them that in prison. That's something they learn in prison. They learn how to stab in prison. So that's probably somebody that's been in the uh but in there before, been in the excuse me, the penitentiary before. But I will tell you this one story. So we got a call for a shooting downtown, or not downtown, but a pretty populated area of Linwood. We started rolling with the fire department, and showed up, and the sheriffs were there, and they kind of stopped us, and they said, hey, you guys just hang back here for a minute. We got to see what's going on. And there it was just melee in the streets. They were just people with crowbars, gun, I guess guns. I didn't see any guns, but just a melee of people, just a crowd just fighting each other. And we always want to run to these people that are getting hurt. It was just too dangerous, right? So we're behind the sheriffs, and when they finally uh it stopped, which seemed like it took 10 minutes to stop, it finally parted. And here's a body, a young boy, bunch of glass. It was shot right in front of a laundromat, bunch of glass right around his body, and I don't know, maybe a bunch of blood. And so they finally wave us in. We start working on the body, and start working on the patient, and the patient's still alive. And to my recollection, I don't know, maybe like 20 holes. We used to count holes. You don't know what entrance or exit wounds are. You just count the holes and where they are. And I was loading the patient up, and thinking as a paramedic and being locked into, like, okay, going through the protocols of what I need to do next for this trauma. We've been calling it in. And just then I felt a tug on my arm, and a lady looked up to me, looked up and goes, "That's my son. Is he going to live?" And I remember that moment caught me so off guard, because uh, we know as paramedics, like, you've been around a while. Somebody with that many holes is not probably going to live. Okay, and how do you start that woman's grieving process right there? You're loading her son up. You're doing everything you can. And someone said, "No, your son's not going to make it." I did the best that I could. I said, "I don't know. We'll meet you at the hospital." And that woman's face, that that look up from her eyes into mine, that look past my eyes into my soul, and mine into hers, is one of those permanent PTSD Rolodex cards that I get in my mind that will come up now and then, and will trigger it's very odd how this happens. I'm sure it happens to other people. Like I'll have a happy moment, really like a good happy family moment. I'll be really proud of my son, and like one of those will pop up, like I'm supposed to feel guilty about having fun because others has suffered. I've learned today to embrace it and to let it go. It's like a passing cloud. It's a thought. It's just it evaporates. It moves past. But those situations in Linwood, those chaotic, crazy situations seem to just repeat themselves. They just put in the 105 freeway, and then the there's a lot of like overpasses and underpasses. There's a big clover leaf that goes through there to for all the traffic to go around. And at the base of the eastbound 105 to the northbound 710, we got a call where we showed up to a convertible that had spun out against the wall. The convertible top was down. There was a driver. He was deceased. And in the back, across from him in the back was a man that was alive. And we showed up first on scene, and I remember saying to him, "Hey, okay, how are you doing? I'm fine, whatever. And what's going on with my buddy? I'm sorry to tell you, he's deceased. Where are my other friends?" "What do you mean, where are your other friends?" "Yeah, where are my other friends? There was four of us in this car." And we spent the next 2 hours searching the trees down below the freeway trying to find the friends. We eventually found them, and not good things happen to bodies that get thrown out of cars, ejected from cars, and go a long way. And that was the first time when uh, that was the first scene that was so horrible that I saw that looked fake. Have you seen that where the scene is so gruesome and so beyond like horror that it seems that somebody must have. That's what I had thought at the time. And my solution back in the time was what it had always been. As a teenager, I had found alcohol, and so I was just observing this long enough till I could get home and drown out the sorrows the next day.
I think
Just
that's
a few
a
memories
coping
from Linwood.
mechanism. Yeah, well, sorry
Right.
to drag bad memories out, but it is a coping mechanism, isn't it? Where it just doesn't seem real, and you go into that separate state, and then if you're not careful, that gets sealed in a little box and then pushed down. I think the stories of the violence, though, they're so important. I had a guest on a while ago, and he was in military medicine, and he said that they would be sent to inner city. I can't remember which city it was. It was Detroit or somewhere like that. They were sent to the trauma centers there so they could get experience on treating gunshot wounds. And I said, just take a step back and think about what you just said. We need to prepare our military medical personnel for war. So let's send them to some American cities so they can get experience. This is the level of crisis that we have with the gun violence in this country. And obviously there were these really, really, hot spots of, South Central, some of these other areas where you absolutely knew. But these are all rooted in loss of industry, on the demonization of addiction, the prohibition. And we know that doesn't work. And yet we still keep doing the same thing. And no one has the conversation of, well, why are there not gangs and people shooting each other in the streets in Lisbon, in Portugal, in Osaka, Japan, in Oslo? This isn't normal what we deal with, and I've seen it and you've seen it, but these are the voices that people need to be hearing, because it's not normal for a group of young men to be like, well, am I going to be a Crip or am I going to be a Blood or am I going to be NS-13? No, you're supposed to be thinking, am I going to be a teacher or an engineer or maybe a professional athlete? Am I going to do some mission work? That's what we should be talking about. But the systemic issues that were put in place in the past have created this poverty, this violence, this leaning into the underworld for addiction. And they are solvable issues, but you don't hear anyone. Every 4 years, no one talks about this. And even recently, the last person who wrote a book about their troubled life around addiction ends up not talking about it at all when they become vice president. So it's such an important perspective to hear, the medics and the cops and all the people involved and the people that were in gangs that have been on here. because this is not normal. And this is something that we can turn around. And then maybe our police officers won't look like they're going to war because people aren't trying to kill them all the time. So learning from, these really troubled areas, I think is very important because at the moment we're doing nothing about it.
I couldn't agree more. And if the number one thing that we're allowing our inheritance to be to our children is ignorance, then we're going to just perpetuate this. And let me just say, we're only as sick as our secrets. Okay, and this is even though I wrote The Last Patient, which is it's a memoir of a firefighter. In reality, it's a human book because what happens to first responders is just an extreme example of what happens to regular society. We just get higher margins, if you will, and the amount of persistent ignorance that is taught generationally to these groups of people that already are at such disadvantage is just heartbreaking. Our ability to plant mentors uh, uh, needs to be our way through, right? I mean, the more mentors we can have, we have more mentorship is really the way through because as iron sharpens iron, men sharpen men, and through masculine leadership, holding the tone, showing these young men how to get through tough times and what the reward is at the end. That really will move the needle for all of us. I couldn't agree with you more. There, we had an initiative in Long Beach. Let me just double click on this one for a second. So we were seeing this in Long Beach, and I had two senior firefighters at Station 11C, which is a storage station and shift in Long Beach. And I worked for this gentleman named Darren Rocket. He was my senior firefighter at the time, and he had a relationship with church and community, and he started the rescue youth program where we would get at-risk youth and bring them into the fire station and work with them and try to be mentors to them. And I believe that the program's still going. It's heartbreaking because the progress is very slow with those young men. Most of them have laid down their core tracks of who they're going to be by the time they're teenagers. So sometimes if we get all the way back to intervening even earlier, but fire departments that engage in that type of diversity and bring the population in to see what we do and to see what their young men are up to, I believe just provides more and more ways and avenues for mentorship for these young men because that is the way through. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%. And I've said this, the difference between you and I and people with the same ACEs score that ended up behind bars, because it's very similar if you look at statistics, is mentors. Is who were those people in our lives that turned us one way when those young men were sent down, the gang route or just drowning in addiction or whatever it was. What was the circle? You're the sum total of the 5 people closest to you. And we were so lucky that we had people that sent us in that right direction. So, not only is mentorship extremely important, but who we allow to be at the helm, whether it's a fire department or whether it's a nation. And is that person a mentor? Is that person a good man? Or are they, a narcissist, a sociopath? And I would argue that, option B has covered certainly the last few. And so even at the very top of this chain, we've got the wrong kind of person being presented as this is what a man is. And no, it's not. That is not what a man is. A man is the firefighter that you just talked about that's already risking his life to help a community. He looks around and goes, we need to do more. That is what a man is. And those are the mentors that we need in our community and that we need in the White House. And I can't stand left or right. Let me be very, very honest. Those are the kind of human beings, regardless of what color their tie is, that we need at the helm of, whatever demographic it is, whether it's a school, whether it's a fire department, or whether it's a nation.
Am I not the only first responder that's sitting back and looking at our leadership in the United States and saying one thing? Is this the best we could do? Is this the best we could do?
330 million people. A
I
huge one.
mean, we have such a talent pool to go from. This is the best we can do, and all of our futures and are tied to this. So it all starts with infecting the eggs. Okay, it starts, of course, with our parenting and our home. I really believe that this crisis can get solved with fatherhood. Okay, and then how do we do that? We have to exemplify and celebrate men, I guess, being fathers and leaning into being fathers. Uh, uh, the pain of fatherhood is the number one thing I would say that has changed me for the better. An example is parenting is very inconvenient, right? It's the most inconvenient everything. You don't get to decide. Like all of a sudden your kid goes off the rails and you're parenting right at that second. But just like anything else, success is opportunity meeting preparation. So if we prepare ourselves as parents, for those off rail moments and those teachable moments, we would do way better. An example is we were talking about being tired, sleep deprived. That I have a 3 second rule, and I would always try to get through those 3 seconds to get to a solution. So in my book, I have a mantra called "Situation Screwed," or the situation, and we've all been there. I mean, how many times have you walked in a door? We've all been there in our lives where the news drops. Oh, this is not going to go down the way that you had planned. And as a matter of fact, your day, your week, or even your life is going to get completely altered. Situation screwed. Oh, right in the breadbasket. But for me, I would stay there. I needed something else. It's the still survivable. Still survivable is the solution. Still survivable is the response rather than the reaction. And we teach our young men to take what's wrong with them and run with it in shame rather than bring it to vetted men, because we're only as sick as our secrets, and things that can't see the light cannot heal. And people that cannot heal are only destined for, there's only one role available for people that can't heal, that leaves them as victims. And victimhood is where the drama triangle lives. And if you don't know what the drama triangle is, okay, uh I'm going to get it wrong, but it's if you look at every villain, excuse me, if you look at the storytelling over the ages, there's always three components where there's drama. There's a villain, a victim, and a rescuer. And if you're playing one of those roles, guess what? You're in the drama triangle. You're participating in the drama triangle. But we as first responders, we are professional rescuers. So we need to not show up and be part of the the drama triangle. We need to go and provide other resources. Excuse me, got a little tongue tied right there.
No problem at all. Well, I want to go to the front door of the fire service. I think, again, as we sit here in 2026, this is an important perspective. I know that it was around 2000 that you were testing, where you finally got hired. Talk to me about how competitive it was to get hired back then. And we're talking pre 9/11 as well.
Right. So when I was when I started testing, that was in 1994. And I'm just going to say, I'm not like a natural born firefighting test taker. I had to take 32 tests. So I was involved in the testing process everywhere and for a super long period of time. Uh, so the test that I took with Long Beach Fire Department, 12,000 people showed up for that test over 3 days for the written examination, and they hired less than 100. So less than 1% of who applied got the jobs with Long Beach Fire Department. The and what happened was, I like everybody else. I went out, I took some tests, and guess what? I sucked, and I just found out ways to get better. And that's what I loved about the firefighting testing process, is because it forced introspection. Well, where can I get better? Where can I get physically better? Where can I get mechanically better? Where can I, because when you're talking about competing against 12,000 people for a less than a percent job, you got to really stand out. And it was, I guess it was still the darling career because every fire department had thousands and thousands, at least in Southern California, thousands of applicants. It would go on for days. And sometimes they would have to limit the applications that they would give out.
Was it a certified process? Were you a certified firefighter by that point, or was Long Beach actually accepting non-certs?
So Long Beach's test that I took, which was in 1998, is when I took that written test. What it was, they gave you a pamphlet, and you had to remember everything that was in that pamphlet. And they tested you just on your memorization skills of that pamphlet. So if you made flashcards and spent all kinds of time preparing, you get 100%. If you just looked at it, tried to take it, no. Was that effective? I don't know, but that's the test that I took, and obviously I did well. Bro, you want me to go through the whole testing process of Long Beach?
No. What I was asking is, the applicants, were they already firefighter certified, or did they
No.
become certified? Okay, so because I mean
Right,
the size of the number, implies that. But when I tested in Anaheim in 2004, it was thousands, and they were certified. So that was what was crazy. Is you still had that many, a lot of people, not 12,000, but you had over 1,000 that walked through the door with their fire, with their EMT or paramedic, with experience working on ambulances, with experience working with CDF. So they came with a resume. Back to your point, how can we be better? Now, I had a lot of certifications. I was already working in Florida, and I flew 2,500 miles. I'm sure that didn't hurt. Okay, this guy obviously is serious too. But it's important to highlight this, because now you have fire departments begging people to come work. And they're like, well, we can't get to get the people. And the question is, well, what did you do to fuck it up? Because we used to have thousands of people line up to be firefighters. And what's the reality is, the conversation that you and I have had, there were things that were broken that we didn't even think about when we walked through the front door of the fire service. We were just grateful to have a job. Well, that on its own can't exist when you're running these shifts and and overtime that's caused, and all these contributing factors that are causing cancer and suicide and divorces and alcoholism. There came a point where we realized, oh, this is a problem, and didn't change anything, and then wondered why young people all of a sudden didn't want to do this job anymore, because as the internet started evolving, they were able to access information. It's an amazing calling, it's an amazing job, but also here's the other side. And so now as the recruitment retention has got worse, the mandatory overtime there has got worse, and you got people out west working 120 hours straight. It's insanity. And then we wonder why there's a suicide crisis and a cancer crisis and a divorce issue. So storytelling how it used to be when you entered the fire service, when I entered the fire service, shows you how it's supposed to be and how far we have fallen. And so when people say, oh, we can't get people now, how are we supposed to fill the fourth shift, the 24/72 that I talk about a lot? It's like, well, they were there, but you fucked it up, and no one took responsibility for it. Not the IFF, not the chiefs organizations, no one. So when you fix the things that are broken, you will have tens or thousands of people testing for fire departments again, because we were there up till about 10 years ago. But it's like there's amnesia. People have forgotten that it was very, very recently that we did have the numbers that you're talking about, and we can get back there, but we have to fix the things that are broken, including several things that we talked about already.
I couldn't agree more. And here's the thing. You have to get involved. The community has to get involved. The listener needs to get involved. You must get involved, or you're going to get what's handed to you. If you care about having robust, appropriate emergency services, the cost of doing business as an entity, as a city, is a proficient police, fire, and first responder department first. you must be able to provide safety and security and health for your people first. Yes, there are many other city services that are worthwhile, but this is not an area that we can subtract from. You don't go to your auto insurance company and say, hey, you know what, I'm not really happy with that. I want a different number. Okay, that's the number. If you want to do business. Now the thing is that we're scaring quality candidates, legacy candidates. Nobody wants to go into the fire service. Why would you? Okay, what did I hear? What did I hear when I was going in, and what are they hearing now? So I have a text chain with 10 young men that are trying to become firefighters. They send me pictures of their watches. 5 o'clock in the morning, my phone's lighting up with all these young men becoming firefighters. What I saw was I would go to the fire station. Okay, do a ride along. They all cared about each other and talked with one another, laughed and joked. Okay, and then their days off, they're wearing a fire department hat. They're at the river. They're out of Catalina Island. They're all muscular. They got time off to enjoy their jobs, so their time off. And they're talking about like, hey, you get to retire when you're 50 if you do a good job. If you do a good job, and you can probably retire in your 50s. And that sounded like, who's giving that job away? But now what we're hearing is, well, if you sign up to the fire department, yeah, you're going to make a lot of money, but guess what? You're going to get force-fed work. You're going to be working. I think at times some departments are mandatoring their certain ranks, 5, 6, 7 times in 1 month. You want to talk about parenting being inconvenient? Well, when your job is ruining 7 of those days, your days off and your ability to recover gets so compressed. We were talking about that earlier. You're never going to get back to baseline.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing is in Florida now, they've proven that when you address the things that are broken, I'm going to use Pasco County. They're a great example because all the areas have worked together. Their chiefs, their county, their union, and they showed, look, if we just take the money that we were losing in all this overtime, filling all these spots and training people who then leave our department, in the workman's comp premiums that are through the roof, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and we put that money into just hiring a 4th shift, now you've got a 24/72 pattern. Their overtime has all but disappeared. Like everyone that works is working straight time, and then of course there will be, overtime once in a while, special events, those kind of things. But as we talk about a lot on here, then if you are a carpenter, a personal trainer, a fisherman, then you can do extra work on the side if you need extra money. And now it's your second passion project, your second tribe, your second identity. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you go to bed at night. Don't work in the ER overnight, of course. But so they've shown that it's working. And I just had a firefighter from a California company department reach out that I should be talking to, because out west, this conversation is almost non-existent. And I just shared yesterday a couple of articles. A San Jose firefighter that made $1 million in overtime over, I think it was 3 years.
Yeah.
And then LAFD, over 4 years, their overtime budget, not operating budget, overtime budget was $1.2 billion with a B. So you're telling me that you don't have the money to staff your department properly, but you're spending that on overtime. I don't understand. I've said this so many times on here, why the CFOs of these cities and these counties aren't the ones banging on the fire department door saying, we need to do this thing they're doing in Florida. Like, what are we doing here? $300 million a year in overtime, for fuck's sake. but those conversations aren't happening. And there are people still telling people, oh, it's cheaper to work over. No, it's not cheaper, because the downstream cost far outweighs, what you think you're saving up front.
Certainly the lure that the city managers are seeing is that there are not the burdening costs with overtime. So you're not paying for an additional person's pension, for their insurance, or what have you. And so they see that as an initial win. But being a first responder is like living life on a high interest credit card and paying the minimums. Eventually, it's due. And you cannot run your first responders or your business at full tilt all the time and expect peak performance. Okay, you don't get in your car and stomp it to the floor all the time and hope that hope that's going to work out. It doesn't. You know, my book, the Last Patient, it shows the human underneath the badge, and it's a tough job and it's a tough crowd that needs to do that job. And our help permeability absorption rate is pretty damn low. But we were talking about compassion, and that's how we can get there is our compassion around driving these people and putting them out like cigarette butts. First responders are not disposable people. They just aren't. And that's why in my book, The Last Patient, there is a family pre-plan. You know how like when we go out to a target hazard and we pre-look at it, we pre-plan what we're going to do. How come we don't take that home and do that with our families? Have a off ramp for this stress, for this conversation, for the hard stuff, and that ties all the way back to what you're talking about is the addictive nature of money itself. And if you're going to put that type of money out for firefighters, you work a little bit harder. You work a little bit harder. We need to put our put checks and balances on our system that we know our people are going to remain healthy and won't work themselves to death. As we know, there's a 10% population of first responders. You're like, do you ever go home? I mean, you're just living as a first responder, and that can't be healthy by any stretch of the imagination. And it seems like where we're going to have to go with this is legislation. I mean, that just seems to be the only way that we're going to be able to get some of this stuff done is to move legislation.
I disagree, and not disagreeing what you're saying, but what's interesting is that needs to happen. Though that ball needs to be rolling, but what you've actually seen is just departments going, well, I'm not waiting for legislation, we're just going to change. And it's beautiful to watch because they realize that they are empowered. This is my fire department. I'm going to work with my city or my county. Okay, this is what we need to do. This is how much it's going to cost for these extra firefighters, but this is how much we're going to save downstream. And they go, okay, that actually makes sense. We're going to take 3 years to do it. Perfect. We're going to advertise that we're doing it so that we can get the people, coming to our department. Fantastic. Now, eventually, if it says that needs to be a state mandate, okay, brilliant. Congratulations. Welcome to the party. But we've already been changing. But yeah, it should be. Absolutely, it should be a legislation. But it also should be a conversation from the IAFF, of which we've heard zero, about why the Northeast works 42 hours a week and then the rest of us work 56 and the federal firefighters work 72. Like there should be a profession standard, full stop. So, I'm all for getting it in writing eventually, but in the meantime, don't wait for that. It would be like waiting for any government to make America healthy again. Here we are, 75% of the population is obese or overweight. Don't wait for a president to change your health. You got to do it within your own four walls. So yeah, I mean, I agree that needs to happen, but I don't think people realize how easy, really, I mean, I use that word, how easy it actually is if you just get the groups to agree that there's a problem, there's a solution, reverse engineer how long it would take for your department, advertise it, and then, grow a set and make it happen. So yeah, it's I can say that now because I've watched it spread throughout the country, and so many of these departments have done it now. Some have been forced to do it. I'm all for that too. You know what I mean? If you want to be the hero of your own story, but actually you are saving your political career, but the outcome's the same, brilliant. That works too. But I will, put on the pedestal some of these departments that have really fought for it. Plano, Texas is another one, which is the closest one, I think, to your direction. And they're taking 5 years, but they took the first step, and they're going to be a year into it already soon. So yeah, I find it very exciting, but that will never happen. We don't have the money. We need the data, all that bollocks. That's all out the window because all that stuff has been proven now.
That's outstanding. And I would be interested to know, like, if it's Plano, Texas, is that, does that fire chief have a open source, this is how I did it, available to other fire chiefs to do. And if you don't, then contact me at captainjamesowen.com and I'll be your consultant. Let's put this together.
Yeah,
I mean,
no, they do.
I'm
They've got their contract out there for everyone to see. And this is what I'm seeing. Sorry to interrupt, but the departments that have actually fought for this, they are bending over backwards to help other departments do the same thing. So when they say the brotherhood and the sisterhood is dead, go look at some of these progressive departments and see how they're helping other departments. You will see the brotherhood and the fire service.
That's really wonderful. And I have been in my own world in retirement. I don't watch much news. And I've been working on this legacy project for writing my book and producing it. Now, as my head comes up to start looking as where the industry's going, and I hear of such positive developments like this, I feel it feels wonderful. I mean, there's some common sense that's coming to the fire service, and with believable amounts of work effort that we can expect out of our people. And if we work our people that hard, there's just nothing left for them to give back to their communities. And we don't want to do that. We want to be the leaders of the community, not the antithesis of it. That's for sure.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we've kind of got you through the front door of the fire service. So walk me through, you mentioned, DUI and alcohol and using that as a coping mechanism earlier in the story. Walk me through, the lowest point that you found yourself in your career. And then what were some of the tools that helped you navigate out of your darkness?
Thank you. So, being a child of Northern California and living on doing blue water cruising, sailing with my parents, being a first responder for 30 years. I was a fire captain for 15. I worked on our lifeguard boats, and I also worked on our big fire boats, our 108-foot fire boats. All that experience, you would think that I would know when I was in trouble, and I sure wasn't. I was I knew that I was getting into trouble, and I wanted to get stay within the fire department but do a different job. So I was going to promote to battalion chief. And I was in the middle of a divorce. I locked horns with one of the command staff members. Never a good idea, by the way. And I put question in my department's mind about my abilities to lead through having post-traumatic stress. And I was taking a battalion chief's exam. My behavior wasn't going so right, and I got assigned to headquarters while 5 different internal affairs investigations played out. Now, luckily, they were just it didn't end up being what I was accused of, but at the time, it felt like I was going to lose my job, even though I knew the truth. And through all of that, we had a line of duty death. We talked about me being a paramedic, a private paramedic. I had one of my paramedic partners when I was a private paramedic was Dave Rosa, and we were paramedic partners in Vernon, California. I said Linwood, and our ambulance company all went out to Vernon, and I worked with him in Vernon, California. He got hired onto the fire department about the same time I did. We were paramedics at Station 11 together. He became a captain. And when I was going through all this, he was the captain at Station 10, where he responded where an arsonist had blown up his own house to get revenge on his neighbor, some crazy man, and he was shot. This man shot him point blank on the fire scene in his turnouts for no reason, just shot and killed Dave Rosa. Dave died. I failed the battalion chief's exam for whatever reason. I was assigned to headquarters, and I was when you want to talk about seeing the gates of hell, I was there. But you know what? I had this field of dreams moment. Kevin Costner, if you build it, they will come. I had this premonition, this voice in my head that said, "Save the last patient." I was like, okay, I need to focus on my son. Time went by, save the last patient. Oh, we were talking about compassion earlier. Must be the compassion that I needed to have for my ex-wife. Save the last patient. I always got to save the last patient. It was lunch break. It was driving rain. I was assigned to headquarters. All the chiefs were looking at me. We were trying to figure out what's going on with Captain Owen. It was I was running on the LA River. Dog shit and pesticide was flowing down. Even the homeless people were in rafts. I mean, it was just a horrible day, just gnarly. And then I heard "Save the Last Patient," and it was like a lightning bolt cracked my chest open. Tears came from my eyes, and I got down on my knees right there in the driving rain, and my alligator tears just pouring out. And it finally struck me: the last patient I needed to save was myself. That's what the higher power was driving me to do. All that effort and all that time that I had put in learning how to save other people's lives and trying to look out for my mom and all that, I had to stop and be selfish and put the oxygen mask on myself and save the last patient. So that was the moment when I knew that I would have to give this thing every amount of effort, focus, and to make my life about recovery. Otherwise, I was going to be a statistic, end up a statistic on somebody's spreadsheet that I died early. And I have my son, I have a son named Cash, and being his dad, and he's my only son and my only kid. It seemed pretty damn selfish the way that I had been living my life uh, to that point, and that I needed to do a big change. And even further from there, I learned that the last patient, James, is all of us. All of us are the last patient. All of us need to look at ourselves where we're neglecting our self care, and we're not bringing our best selves to the relationships that mean the most about us. So that was the moment.
Something I ask pretty much everyone that was at a point of crisis, and I'll preface it. When we were younger, when people talked about suicide, we were told, you heard other people say, and obviously it became our beliefs then, it's selfish, it's cowardly, how could they think of the family. And then you start a podcast and you speak to hundreds of people that were at that point, some of whom literally went through with their suicide attempt and survived it. And all of a sudden, there's this common denominator in the rhetoric, and you realize that we're missing a huge part of this conversation. What I realized was when that Jenga tower of all these contributing factors begins to fall, the brain has become so miswired that that individual's belief, their true belief, is that I'm a piece of shit. I'm the reason why, for my family's pain. And if I just take myself out, everyone else will be happier, which is not cowardly and selfish. It's actually compassionate and courageous. It's wrong. It's a distorted mindset from everyone with a healthy mind looking on. But in that moment, they truly believe that they are the reason for their family's pain. And then you hear the coward and the selfish, and now you're just pouring more guilt and shame onto guilt and shame. And then, so many of our men and women, we're burying them to bagpipes and last calls. When you were heading that way, even though you didn't have a plan, did you start hearing that voice telling you that you are a burden, like we've heard so many of our men and women talk about?
Absolutely. Absolutely, without a doubt. So, those that have been there will know that feeling is the gates of hell, and you're pretty desperate to feel any way other than what you feel like. You want relief. And you see that dealing with that much pain is affecting, you can see it on the faces of those around you. And that question came up frequently. Here I'm at headquarters. Gosh, am I really what these allegations say that I am? Maybe I'd be better if I wasn't here. Frequently and pervasive was that thought. But when you have that cathartic moment where that pain is so much, that breakthrough moment is, to me, when you accept that that pain is there to help you, to change you, to get into that pain is because it's quoted, pain is the only instrument sharp enough to cut away the excess of self. That's when I had to accept that pain was going to transmute me into a different human being. I was not going to be the same. My goals and aspirations were going to change. I was headed to be a new person. And that acceptance of the pain, that scary moment for me was where I reached out my hand and asked Creator to just hold my hand. Will you hold my hand, God? Literally what I said, will you hold my hand? And my hand was held. And that's where I started to embark on taking the octopus and the tentacles of post-traumatic stress, hypervigilance, job stress, whatever you want to call it, okay, off of myself. And as I did it, I said, you know what? I might as well. I wanted to really pay attention, and that's when I started to get the idea about maybe I'll write a book about this. And it was a half-cocked notion, but it was a little trick that I was like deploying on myself to really pay attention to what worked, what didn't work, and to adjust my dials till I got to some place that was of some comfort. And let me just say, I'm not out of the fight. Nobody's ever out of the fight. I still got my bad days, my old habits still knock on the door now and then. And but I have reverence to that moment. And I've been around a lot of people that have been suicidal to that moment also. If you feel that you are unmanageable with your own mental health, there is no shame. And I encourage you to call 988 or 911. But if you feel that you are in a manageable state and you can manage and you're to the part where you have accepted that things are going to change, the pain is there to assist you, humans make mistakes and you're just a human, okay? That's where people like me, CaptainJamesOwen.com, where the resources there. I'm working on a mission-driven initiative called Camp Pivot, where it's going to be a digital warehouse, like an Angie's List for first responders and the people that love them, to get modalities and get connected with people and things that actually work. Hopefully someday, then I'd like to point to like a retreat, a brick and mortar retreat. But it's the compassion to that moment is the moment of self-compassion. And the more compassion you give yourself, because you can't give away something that you don't have. So the more compassion you have for yourself is the more compassion that you can give to other people. And as you walk away from those dark moments and you see how close you were to making a really poor choice, the answer is always the same. It's better to have you here. The reason that we know that you're supposed to be here is because you have a pulse. And I encourage you to use my mantra: situation screwed, still survivable. Yeah.
You mentioned about discovering what worked and what didn't. So what worked and what didn't?
Right. So I was given the gift of desperation. And so I was saying yes to all kinds of things, and then I would find stuff that worked along the way. Okay, so let's go for that low hanging fruit stuff. Turns out aromatherapy is warrior therapy. I mean, if you got a girly smelling candle, I'm gonna kick my shoes off, man. I for whatever reason, it just sets the mood like it's a constant reminder. Okay, nice deep breath puts me in that mindful moment. Then there's some stuff that didn't work. So I was working with a mentor, and he said, "Hey, you know what? I maybe you get something out of going to a sweat lodge. Sweat lodge? Okay." So I so I do all this investigation. I end up finding the shaman, and he goes, "Yeah, I've got a sweat lodge," and we sign up and we go there, and it seems pretty cool. We're doing all of our intentions. We get in there, and everybody's chanting and doing their thing, and it's getting hotter and it's dark and we're all crammed in there, and I'm going through my firefighter mayday procedures. Okay, I'm going through grab lives protocol. My skin was crawling. It was not that heat therapy. That type of heat therapy was not my thing. So I didn't judge myself on it. I went outside and I was by the fire, and I found something that worked there. Float takes, sensory deprivation, not my thing. But in working with the shaman, he said to me, he goes, "Well, this didn't work out for you. Well, how about you come back here to do some medicine work?" I'm like, "Well, what do you mean medicine work?" He goes, "Well, I'm a purveyor and a shaman over a medicine ceremony where we use psilocybin, and we do an intention ceremony. We decide on your dose, And then as you come down, we share it with everybody. I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. And then I got more and more curious about it. I had heard out there that psychedelics would have potentially some good effect for people like me, and I was not as sober as I am now, but not that that really has any matter because I am a proponent of plant medicine. So I went to the shaman, and as lined out in my book, The Last Patient, in the chapter "The Night God Spoke Back," I worked with a shaman and did full send to the other side, and that was something else. Now, I let me tell you that story because it's an interesting one. You meet with the shaman. We decided on the dose. We went by the fire pit. We were doing shamanistic drumming. I said my intentions. We took the medicine. We went back inside, and there's drumming, gogging, super awesome. But then I felt the medicine really start taking effect, and I need to be by the water. So there was a fountain outside. So I just got my chair, went outside, sat by the fountain. Now, at no time did I feel like I was completely unable to snap back into the present moment. I was letting the medicine do the leading the dance. I was and I was out there and it was dripping, and all of a sudden it was like late September. I decided to stand up, and when I stood up to go down this path, do you know in September those gigantic brown spiders that make those gigantic brown webs, those gigantic webs? Like it's
Yes.
September out here. Well, I had the fortune of being high as hell on mushrooms, running face first into one of those where the little dude took a ride on my shoulders, and it completely freaked me out. And I ran over to where the sacred uh, the sacred ceremony, the fire pit, and the sweat lodge are there to run in to that area. There was a street light there, and that street light ends up blowing up and being a direct portal to higher power. And now all of a sudden, I am on Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. Right next to me, yeah, I got Jesus Christ holding a bloody lamb. Okay, I'm just telling you what happened. Okay. And he goes, "You asked for this moment." I go, "I did?" He goes, "Yeah, you could talk to Creator." And I looked up the Creator, which was a rotating mandala with colorful diamonds going down sun rays out. Uh, and I went, "Oh my God, is that you, God?" And then I finally got to ask this question. I said, "God, why in the hell do you allow so much suffering in your world? I've been seeing all this suffering as a fireman and all these people, and I don't understand why you would take me, your warrior, and we would have to see all that. What the hell is wrong with you?" And the answer back, I'm just reporting back, was, "You're the best that I had at the moment, and you and I are figuring this out in real time together." And for whatever reason, that portion of that weight that I had carried evaporated at that moment. Now, just after there, like the lights show stopped, and I was pretty much back to like ground zero. Didn't know what happened to me, and there was a man that was there and witnessed it, and he was crying. He goes, "That was the most beautiful thing ever. I just witnessed a man in front of his creator." I didn't know what to do with all that. We went back, we sat down. The shaman starts singing a song about dolphins, and I lose my bacon. I started on a laughing jig that starts for like five. I had to go in another room. I was laughing so hard, and contagious laugh. Like I screwed up the whole ceremony. But they kept my keys. And we all talked about it. We heard about everybody else's adventure, and I got a chance to sit down with the shaman and before I left and talk about that. And he goes, "Well, that message was for you." And that psilocybin uh, episode turns out to be one of the most rapid relieving of trauma that I've done in that area. And I would surely repeat it again, but I haven't found the need to. I wouldn't feel like I would be out of alignment with with my sobriety because of the work that I did there. Now, this is one man's opinion. Don't send me hate email, okay? This is my opinion. Is what happened to me, and I I strongly. So, what does that mean? What is the results of me doing that? Is that I want people to seek. And I'm not telling you to go out and find Jesus and mushrooms, okay? But go out and seek. There's a lot of seeking that needs to be done, and you're gonna have to kiss a lot of toes and do a lot of modalities that don't work for you. It's not the end of the world. Situation screwed, still survivable, right? We'll just move on to the next one. That was one of the things I did. I went to West Coast Post Trauma Retreat. That's where I started as a 5-day clinician based symposium out here, and I highly recommend it. That was a great way to start my post traumatic stress journey. We all carry rocks in our backpack, and we got to get those rocks out. And you end up with a title called JFU. And I can't tell you what that is. Just go to West Coast Trauma Retreat to find out. I did Task Force Heroes. I did, but and way over here with the Soaring Wings Foundation, they provide neurofeedback, 20 sessions of neurofeedback coupled with hyperbaric oxygen. So ahead of that, Dr. DeSiena, they puts a brain map on you. They map your brain, have you follow like a click through thing, and then you go through all this treatment and you do it again. And literally you can see areas of your brain getting restored. So my thought is to try everything. And I would really, where I've gotten a tremendous amount of relief that I would super want to make normalized to some degree for first responders, veterans, and all that is Alcoholics Anonymous. I know it sucks to go. I know standing up as a first responder in a meeting is especially like, are there going to be felons in there? Yeah, there may be. But what I found so much more help in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I poo-pooed how some lady that's got a single mom who's got 3 kids and is fighting for her sobriety and to pay for her bills is good treatment for me as a first responder. It's all there because without physical sobriety, I've not seen many people be able to do much work with post traumatic stress, if any at all. In my opinion, you must be sober to get through to make this progress, to feel the full weight of your injuries so you can feel them and move past them. There are and another thing that really worked out for me is CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. Now listen, I went through 6 therapists before I found mine. So my recommendation is interview your therapist. Those that say that they're you got to interview them because just what they put on their website may not be that person. But I got a kick-ass therapist that could kick my front teeth in if I needed to, and she introduced me to cognitive behavioral therapy. More importantly, the 12 steps of ACA, which is alcoholic children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And from there, that was super important. That part was super important for my recovery process because what ACA did is, first of all, if you go on the ACA website, look at the 14 traits of somebody that comes from a dysfunctional family. And if you associate with those, you might want to read on, which is probably going to be a lot of. And by the way, the ACA book, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, you could just put fire department and then pull out and put fire department in place of where it says family, and you probably get a lot of really good advice for the fire department too. But let me talk specifically about what happened with me in pain and why this is important. Okay. So the therapist kept leading me back into the pain until I could describe the pain. And what I understand is things that we can locate, describe, and define, we can fix. So just the feeling like crap isn't enough. So she would lead me into a certain traumatic event or whatever, and we would a certain stress that I had that is one of the Rolodexes that's stuck in my mind that makes me feel bad, and we would bring that up, and we would find out that the pain has a GPS location. It's not me; it's over there. It has a color, it has a shape, it has a sound. Okay, and you can put some of these words to it. Like she's like, "Hey, what color is your post? What color is your poster max dress?" It doesn't have a color. Go in your mind to tell me. She says, "Go in your mind and see what comes up first." I go, "Dark gray." Oh, okay. Well, what does that dark gray look like? Looks like clouds. Oh, okay. Once I started to be able to name these things, then they were outside of me, and they were locations that I could go back to when I was ready to deal with them. I could unbox them later. And those are just a few things that I did.
Well, I think it's amazing for two reasons. Firstly, it illustrates something that I talk about a lot, where everyone's toolbox is different. Every single person, and I kind of like you, I see God in nature. So being outside, being in the ocean, being places like that are absolutely healing modalities for me. But there are so many different things that people can use, and if something doesn't work, even it might not be as you said, it might not be the method, it might be the individual. Like, I have heard so many EAP horror stories about a firefighter being sent to a counselor, but it was just the wrong counselor. Doesn't mean that counseling doesn't work, but you sure as hell didn't find the right person. So, as you said, if that's a modality that you want to pursue, then try some other people. Find someone who's truly culturally competent, not someone who just lists fire and police along with 20 other things that they're supposed to be an expert in. But the psychedelic conversation is so exciting. I just literally yesterday interviewed a couple who I've had on the show individually as well, but they started something called the Siren Project after they found the psilocybin and 5-MeO-DMT journeys, were life-changing, life-saving for them. And now they fund other first responders to go through this program. There's another one called 343 Fund that's sending people through Ibogaine. So this toolbox is so broad, and a lot of people that do the plant medicine journeys, they are able to kind of step away from opioid addiction or alcoholism or some of these other areas that maybe traditional programs aren't working. And then after they come out of these retreats, then maybe it does start working. Maybe the 12 steps start working now, or the counseling session, or the EMDR, or the CBT. Now you're amplifying it because you've opened that box finally. So going back to our conversation at the beginning, where we're talking about performance, this is the hope that people need. I'm just crazy. I went to the counselor. They burst into tears. They said they couldn't help me. If that's the presented as the only option, of course there are so many in despair, and sadly we probably lost many people because of that very thing. But the message that needs to be out there is that there are all these different things, and you get to, exactly like you said, you get to go like a library and start looking at shelves and figuring out, okay, well, I like this MDMA. This is my personal thing. I did that recreationally when I was younger, and I really actually enjoyed it. It was a really nice, pleasant drug. Now, I did a lot of dancing, a lot of hugging people back then, but that's the route that I want to go. I'm waiting for a certain family event to happen, and I'm going to go down that path myself. So there's all these different exciting areas that we can, as first responders, access. You might have to go across the national borders, or maybe you can even find some of these domestically, but they are saving lives. They absolutely are. So it's so amazing to hear all the different areas and these tools, like picking flowers. You went through a field and found all the things that you liked, tried some, smelt that flower, no, that doesn't work. And then you ended up getting this toolbox, this work for you. And here we are. Now you've written a book and you're helping other people. So I think it's an amazing testimony of the hope that is actually out there if people just, let go of the stigma, let go of the, EAP presentation, and realize that there are, thousands of first responders going down some of these paths and having incredible results.
And so those that are out there listening that feel broken, that none of this will work for, I'm here to tell you, you're not broken. You're just bent. And bent things need alignment. And what we're talking about here with the plant medicine, that may not be for everybody, but in my 30 years of being a paramedic, I never went on a call or anybody that was suffering from addiction to magic mushrooms. It's just I never saw it, not even one time. And I went on hundreds of thousands of calls, and I haven't even heard of that as well. But like anything, that needs to be taken with sacred reverence. And the key ingredient to all this is honesty. We got to be honest with ourselves, and we got to be honest with those that are willing to help us out. And we also have to be honest about what is our true motive for going after some of these treatments. I have experience with, and look, I can't tell you what works for you or what doesn't work for you, but I have experience with another first responder that initially was telling me about doing treatment with ketamine, and how excited he was to get me to try ketamine, and he's still going after ketamine treatments. That doesn't seem like something that I want to do. I want to be able to access something, have it produce a result, and then move past it. Uh, have you seen Waves of War? In Waves of War, which is on Netflix, and that tracks the Navy SEALs that they go through with Mission Within. So it's not just first responders that are considering this. I mean, it's widespread to other operating communities as well.
Yeah, no, I've had Marcus Capone, who's one of the main SEALs, and I had Trevor Miller, who's behind Ambio. He's the founder on the show. Because this is it. Like when I saw the SEALs starting to talk about this, I realized, well, this is what we need to talk about in our profession. When I had SEALs talking about sleep deprivation, Kirk Parsley, the origin really of this podcast was, why the hell are we not talking about this in the fire service? We're the most sleep deprived profession on the planet. So I mean, now collating this evidence, hearing these stories, knowing that this, again, not one size fits all, but this is another really exciting opportunity for someone that it might be the right fit, and adding that to the shelf of all these healing modalities, it puts hope in hopelessness. So I find it very exciting. Now, your book is The Last Patient. So tell people what they can find between the covers, and then let's talk about where they can actually purchase it.
Okay. Well, The Last Patient is a culmination of my entire life. It's a memoir where I don't end up the hero. The Last Patient is a permission slip for first responders to go get help. The Last Patient is a book written for those that want to understand first responders and those in high stress professions, what's going through our minds. Because it's a human story, you get to see the human behind the badge, the mistakes, the failures, the 2 trips to rehab, the and the unshakable, unwavering attitude that I deployed with my motto: situation screwed, still survivable. No matter how bad the situation looked, no matter what I thought the results were, I kept going. I felt what you're going to find is success with recovery may not be linear. It may take several times. You may have to storm that castle. We also put some names to some things that may be in your life, like, do you have a favorite chair that you go to your house where you disappear and your family knows to leave you alone? Uh, does your department or does your squad call the peer support the hug squad? There's probably some similarities in there. My book also deals with line of duty death and the feelings associated with that. It deals with suicide of members of a member of my department, and it is a fatherhood book, a divorced dad book, and a arm around your shoulders while you're on your own personal journey, seeking to get better, seeking to be a better man, be the man that you always wanted to be without the effects of post-traumatic stress. My book is there to be a companion with you. And if I really strike a chord with you, you can find me at captainjamesowen.com. And I do 3 things. I sell books, obviously. I'm trying to get my story out to help as many first responders as possible. I do coaching for organizations and individuals, and I also do some keynote speaking.
You mentioned Captain Dave Rosa. I remember doing a hero workout, through CrossFit, and it was in honor of him. And if my memory serves me right, it was a pool workout, like I think 50-meter swim and then push-ups or burpees or something like that. But let's circle round. Tell me about him. Tell me who Dave was.
So Dave Rosa was my buddy. He and I knew each other, like I said, when we were back in Linwood. When I was back working for Adams Ambulance, that's where we started our bromance together. Uh, Dave was a North Long Beach guy, Station 11 man, and that's a storied place to come from in Long Beach. I too came from there. Has absolutely beautiful wife and two kids. Dave was a baseball umpire. For whatever reason, he just loved being an umpire and like getting the dust kicked in his feet. And he decided that he was going to take up master swimming because he got a little round, and so he figured he'd take up master swimming. He ended up becoming a really good swimmer. And I was working. One of my assignments was I was rescue boat. The lifeguard rescue boat has a fire captain who's a paramedic and deckhand that's on there. So Dave was since he was a swimmer, he tried out and made qualified relief to be one of the guys that worked on the rescue boat, which was really good because he and I were able to do that. There's a story in the book that talks about, taking a swim test with Dave, doing my yearly lifeguard qualification swim with Dave. He was a great swimmer. I'm not a great swimmer. I just would barely make it with my lifeguard swim. And he was yelling at me as I was swimming back that I wasn't going to make my time. Hey, you're not going to make your time. You're going to go over. And I was like, oh my God. So I dumped the tank, went as hard as I could. And, he pushed me into my personal best record ever on my lifeguard qualification swim. And he's just a big love bug. He was a love member of Long Beach Fire Department. A really great training captain. He related really well with rookies. He had a very gregarious laugh and just such a wonderful nature about him. He was one of those men. I went up and down the hero to zero on the kitchen table rumor mill. I was all over the place, and he always treated me the same, whether I was high or low in political opinion. Dave always just treated you how Dave knew you. Uh, when I got the news of his death, it always comes in at never gonna his murder. I said when he got murdered, and that I got that call. I had just taken my second battalion chief's exam, and all that craziness was going down with the department where I was headed to go for my year of headquarters while they did their disciplinary investigations. And it was my ex-wife that called me to give me that news at 5 o'clock in the morning. I was out in Las Vegas hoping to sit by a pool just to decompress after a tough promotional exam. And that news, even touching on at this moment, is so breathtaking that such a beautiful man would be taken so senselessly. It still hurts to this, still hurts to this day. And what I have to say about things that are like that is that they don't ever really go away, and that they don't dull, and the sound and shape, they don't change. What changes is us and how we relate to it and how we use it for the positive. So I got the news of Dave's death, and obviously the tone of the vacation changed. And by the time I got back, uh, I was up on the mandatory list. So the mandatory list is when your turn to the yellow shift will get force hired. And I just come off this vacation, and I got force hired back into his spot with his crew just 2 weeks after he passed. His handwriting was still in the fucking logbook, dude. his I heard as they had come a few days before to get his stuff out of the station, and I heard it was just brutal. Like 15 words went by at lunch with the crew. What do you say? And laying in that man's bunk in the fire station 2 weeks after he was passing, and it was handwriting. Dave was there at that moment, right there. That's had a big sign in apparatus bay with Dave and his turnouts and all his flames behind him and all this. And I just, Dave would have hated all that. He wasn't a big fanfare for like attention or anything like that. He's just one of the best firemen I ever met, and just a beautiful human being. Um, he's my brother. He's my friend, and he's gone. And there's a lot of days, and there are others like Dave Rosa. There's Darren Rocket. There's Chris Parker. There's Ryan Thornton, and others. Um, and I love those men. I love those men that have passed, and they have left an indelible mark on my heart. And in a big way, I feel like I owe it to them to bring this message and to be my maximum best, not only for myself but for the initiatives that they drove on, that they cared about. And I'll tell you, one of the most fucking heartbreaking things ever, my man, is the fire department goes away. These men passed, and we've done some great things around Dave's passing, but other men have passed, and their kids are still suffering. So one of our past members, his son, I'm still in contact with, and is struggling himself. Still to this day. The part where we say be honest and accept help and all that, he's just not ready. You have to be ready to accept help. And that's the thing. That's the thing about these passing these men. The pain of it puts breath back in my lungs, puts rhythm into my feet. And it makes getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning and getting after in the gym worthwhile. Those men would give anything to be me, to go to have another day with their family, let alone write a book, get to meet wonderful men such as yourself. They're out there doing the right thing, respecting the word of masculinity and leadership, community and love, how it's supposed to be, or as close as you and I can see it. And these are things that Dave would have really appreciated, and these other men would have appreciated. They would want me to have looked to their death as motivation and encouragement to do well in the future.
I think it's just so important to revisit who these men were or women, whoever we lost at that time. And I commend you in taking your story and using it to be the solution, because it's not even just the suicides that we've had and the murder suicides that we've had. I mean, I had some of the guests from LA County, and they had to go through that. But that far extends beyond the uniform. And obviously, the person who murdered Dave was struggling from mental health, mental illness, and then we said the gang members in early part in Linwood, it's the same thing. So we have a national crisis that's taking our men and women through violence, is taking them through self-harm, and then the traumas that we see, and then what we pass on to our kids. And I think this is the thing. We can't, be, as I always ask guests, king for a day and just wave a magic wand and fix all this. But we can use our stories to pass this on. And I think that the more of us, I think the fire service needs to have a voice. We all know Navy SEALs that have written books, and have shows. But, the police and the fire and the EMS and dispatch and corrections, like those are voices that people need to hear, because we see how the world really is. And we see the bad stuff, but we also see the solutions. And the more of these voices, the more changes that happen, the fewer people are going to find themselves getting to a point where they take their own life or take someone else's life, whether it's in uniform or beyond. So thank you. Thank you for visiting that. Thank you for telling us about Dave and some of your other brothers, because they do live on. And I've always said, we can't bring them back, but we sure as fuck can do something in their memory to make a change.
Absolutely. And I encourage those that are sitting, suffering silently to let's open up a moment right here. Let's have a sacred portal. Let's make a decision today that we're going to live differently, that we're going to try things, and we're not going to get discouraged with the results, that we'll just put in the action. We'll put in the action and put our heads down and follow the man in front of us. And it's important to find uh, outside organizations, okay, to replace your men once you leave as well. I don't want to leave this conversation without mentioning the Kaizen Dojo. Kaizen Dojo is a collection, it's a circle of men that are involved in accountability and go through a certain amount of training to be vetted, trusted men for one another. All men need a mission, a purpose, and a team to get there. And the Kaizen Dojo is a confidential organization. I can only tell you about the results of it. And the results of it have been that I have found men that have been able to stand up and be equal to fire brothers to support me in getting this message out and becoming the man that I always wanted to be. And I appreciate you highlighting that. And there are a lot of really great men and women out there that just need a little bit of treatment and can come join us in this conversation to get this going nationally. I mean, there's a lot of things to focus on, but I think you and I both have a passion for our up and coming young men that want to join the fire service. We want to leave it better than we found it, and to encourage talent to continue on in emergency services. We need men and women like you.
Beautiful. Well, I want to thank you so much. I mean, I always say this for your courageous vulnerability, but also acknowledging the fact that when you have revisited some of these stories, some of these memories, that it does open a wound. So to do that, because it's going to help people listening, I want to thank you for that as well. So thank you so much for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
You bet. Meet me at CaptainJamesOwen.com. And there we're going to talk about the initiative Camp Pivot, which seeks to be a nonprofit, be a digital warehouse. Just check, we'll be doing updates. So Camp Pivot's going to start filling in here over the next 6 months, year. If we need to have a further conversation, you can just schedule a free hour with me by going to my website. My schedule's right there. You can get plugged into it. We can have a honest conversation about how to put the wheels back on the track for yourself or your organization and get this word out there. Thank you so much, James. It's an honor to be on the Behind the Shield podcast. It was an honor to be a firefighter and a brother to you. And I would do it again, given the same scenario. I just wish we could have rode the backseat together. That's my wish.